Are you looking for true personal freedom? The freedom to design a life you truly desire? Then you're absolutely in the right place. True personal freedom comes from when you take 100% responsibility and control of your money and your mind. Here, you're going to learn ideas, tips, and wisdom that's going to help you bridge the gap from where you are now to your dream life in the future. My name is Randy Wilson, and welcome to the Rich Mind Podcast. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Rich Mind Podcast. And today, coming to you with another fantastic guest. Today, I have with us Jim Gardner. Jim Gardner is out of the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. He's actually the father of 2 adult children with 5 grandchildren, with 1 on the way, from what I understand. So congratulations on the 1 on the way. I don't know if that's a boy or a girl, but that's always an exciting time for sure. He's a mental performance coach and creator of the Warrior Performance Creative, where he helps high-level athletes, professional athletes, C-level executives really hone in on their performance, their preparation to really gain the skills, gain the awarenesses in their lives to perform better on their day-to-day tasks. He's also a best-selling author and also the board chairman of the Adaptive Training Foundation, which I'm super excited about that. A little bit about that Adaptive Training Foundation was in a book that he was part of. This is the best-selling book, the Success Habits book. And just a little brief thing about the Adaptive Training Foundation. It's where veterans and civilians who were born with or have experienced physical impairment learn to defy impossible through physical fitness, mindfulness, and community. Just that one little sentence. That's super cool. So I'm excited about getting into that part of the conversation as well. But first of all, Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Randy. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And, I'm just so thankful that you and I have had the opportunity to become friends. And we'll probably get into it a little bit later. But I think, God has a way of connecting the paths of people who can, support one another and make the world a better place. So I'm very grateful for that.
100%. So a little bit of backstory just about us, right? We're part of a mastermind. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but it seems like every time we get so that it's open seating when you arrive, right? We always seem to be sitting close to each other, if not right next to each other. And we just had another example of that just in the last couple of weeks. And that's where it spawned the invitation, right, for you to come on the show and in this conversation we're going to have today. But I don't know if you've noticed that or not. But yeah, we've had probably 4 or 5 instances where we're literally sitting right next to each other. Have you noticed that?
Yes, I have. And I think to a degree we're creatures of habit. So, we find a place that seems comfortable and we stick with it. So yeah, it, presented the opportunity for us to be here today. So that's awesome.
Yeah, super excited about that. So to start off with, can you give the listener a little bit of background about yourself? Can you just kind of give a few minutes of a little bit of your backstory?
Sure. I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas, and got down here to Texas just as soon as I could. I I had the opportunity to do some traveling actually when I was pretty young, and we can get into that in a little while. But traveled the Southeast United States quite a bit, and had decided that I either wanted to live in Atlanta, Georgia, or Dallas, Texas, and it just so happened that Dallas happened to open up first, and so I've been here since 1982. So this is home. Again, maybe a little bit later we'll get into a few more details, but I commuted to Boston virtually every week for 10 years as opposed to moving. And did the same thing for 13 years to San Francisco and really kind of all over the world from here. But this is home. My roots are here and have been for a while, and I love it here. But yeah, as you mentioned, I've got 2 adult children. I can't even believe it. I was telling somebody just the other day, I still remember putting my daughter in the car seat at the hospital here in Dallas, and she turns 40 in September. So and has her own family as well. And then I have a son who next week will turn 34, and he has a family. He's the one that his wife, my my daughter-in-law has one in the oven. We do know that it's a girl, so that'll be two girls and one boy for them, and they're all excited. So yeah, it's kind of going back a little bit as far as the backstory, and again, we can maybe dive in a little bit deeper if you want. But I think like so many people that I know, unfortunately, came from a broken home. My parents, excuse me, my parents divorced when I was 10. My mom had some challenges and decided she didn't want to be with my dad any longer. And he soon after moved from Kansas to the Denver area and started a new family. And so that kind of left me and my two younger sisters there alone for the most part. And since I was a little bit older, ended up taken to the streets and led a crazy, insanely dangerous life for almost 7 years. And so all of that was the foundation, really the precursor that would open doors. And we can talk about that in a minute as well. But, ultimately got me here to where I am today.
That's awesome. So I know those challenges back in those 7 years that you mentioned, and one part of the story that I've seen that you've said is that miraculously you never really got caught. You never really had that moment where it's like, oh, the wake up call, right? It's like, maybe I'm on the wrong path. Is that really kind of how I read it or how I've seen?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. Honestly, just I really didn't care. I mean, I just was, whatever happened happened. But growing up where I did, in the part of Wichita that I grew up in, you just kind of knew everything that was going on, and so we would even sometimes taunt the cops just for something, a little extra, a little icing on the cake. And I mean, it was everything from, dealing drugs to grand theft, arson, everything you can imagine. And, it was kind of interesting. And this too, I think helped in later years. But we did plan things out. We would surveil something that that we were looking at taking advantage of in one way or another, and we would take our time and just kind of see what traffic flows were, and when the police or cops were around in that area and when they weren't. And but I do have to give ultimate credit, I guess, in one way, to God Himself. I didn't know God at the time, but as I say nowadays, He knew me, and He could have possibly taught me a valuable lesson had I gotten caught, but it obviously would have changed the trajectory, of my life, and obviously that wasn't His plan. So yeah, made it through unscathed, close calls, but yeah.
And created a skill set that is actually proven to be valuable in the marketplace as you've gotten older, which is super, super cool, which we'll definitely get into that as well.
Sure.
Well, let's dive in real quick to the three questions. I always love asking the same three questions to my guests. It's always a lot of fun. I always enjoy hearing what the answers are, right? Everyone's a little bit different, and it's always a lot of fun to see where the conversation goes from these first three questions here. But the first one is who's had the biggest influence on your life, Jim?
So without a doubt, and as I said a moment ago, I didn't know Him, but He knew me, and that's Jesus Christ. Um, I consider myself, from the perspective of a lot of friends, to be somewhat of a baby Christian, but found Jesus and accepted Him as my Savior in 2011, and so since then, my life has just exploded from that standpoint, with the people that I've met, the organizations that I've become involved in, working with a lot of other men, Christian men, bringing people to Christ, and it's just been phenomenal. But I do have to say too, as part of His plan, and we touched on this a moment ago, what what enabled me to turn my life around was a high school teacher. I bounced along basically through junior high and high school when I attended. As an example, I was called into the administrator's office my sophomore year. It's about March timeframe, and they informed me that I was failing every class and I was the most truant student that they knew of. And so, what was I going to do about it? And one of the big things was that I'm dyslexic, so it was a challenge to read, which made all the other subjects challenging as well. And I just flat didn't want to be there. But I knew for some reason I just had this innate sense that I needed to at least, get my high school diploma. So I stuck with it as best I could. And one day I was walking out of my US government class, and my teacher was one of these guys who just loved to tease the kids, poke fun at them, and the kids loved him. And as I was walking out, he hollered my name. He said, "Gardner, come here." And he had a podium in the front of the room. And so I walked up there, and he said, I've heard the stories from the streets and I've observed you when you've been here. And he said, "You're not going to live much longer. Or if you decide to make some changes, you can change the world."
Mm.
And he said, "Have you thought about going to college?" And I just laughed at him because that was the last thing in the world I wanted to do. And anyway, for some reason, he just kept pressing and pressing and pressing for the rest of that year. And that was about halfway through that school, my senior year in high school. And so I did graduate with my class, and I actually started college that following September. But it was interesting. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was talking to a friend in New York, and she, was kind of asking my backstory, and so I'd shared that with her. And his name is Mr. Lewis Ballard, by the way. And so she said, "What does Mr. Ballard think of, how your life's turned out?" And I said, "Well, he doesn't know as far as I know." And she says, "I'm giving you 90 days to get in touch with him and let him know what he did in your life." And I said, "I don't know if he's even still alive." When we're in high school, it's like our teachers, they might only be 4 or 5 years older than we are, but they seem like they're ancient. And so I took the challenge. This was like in January. So I had until, sometime in March. And so I called some friends who still live in Wichita, and some of them had run across him, in the last few years, but not recently. And I just got, Uncle Google out and Googled his name. And so there were two or three, but he's got kind of a unique spelling. And I noticed an address that was just within blocks of the high school, and it had a phone number. And I called the phone number, and he answered, and I made sure it was him. And he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I don't even know if you remember me, but you literally saved my life, and I've written a book that where I talk about that, and I'm going to come to town tomorrow," which was going to be on a Friday, "and I'd like to take you to lunch or dinner." And he says, "Well, call me when you get here." And he hangs up. It's like, okay. So I got up to Wichita on Friday afternoon, and I called him. And he said, "Well, first of all, let me apologize because you called me right in the middle of a Wichita State Shocker basketball game. And they're in the Sweet 16, and they are my team. And I didn't have time to be interrupted by you." And so, anyway, I said, "Well," repeated, "I'd like to take you to lunch or whatever." And he says, "How about coffee?" And I said, "Okay. Yeah, let's meet for coffee. So, what Starbucks would you like to go to?" "No, I want to go to McDonald's." And so we agreed on a time, agreed on the McDonald's, and I got there a little bit before he did. and he described what he was going to be driving. And so I see him pull up and he comes in and I said, well, let me go buy you some coffee. And he said, you're not going to buy me any coffee. Why do you think I wanted to come to McDonald's? I'm a senior. I get it for free. So we sat down and started talking. And I asked him, I said, why me? And he said, I have no idea. And I found out then as well that he and his wife never had kids.
Mm,
So, it's just, that's why I say, it was a God thing. That's how I look at it. And I had taken him a copy of the book and had, written him, how much appreciation and how grateful I was for what he did, whether he knew it or not. And um, he wanted, I can't remember, he wanted me to write something. So I didn't have a pen with me. So I ran out to my truck to grab a pen and I came back in. Well, he had read that and tears just streaming down his face. And so it was really worthwhile. And I have to thank my friend in New York as well for, making me realize the opportunity that I was missing to share with him what he had done. And so yeah, that's a little bit of a long way around, but he literally, saved my life, I believe, turned my life around, and got me, pointed in the right direction. And there were opportunities after that for missteps and bad choices, but I always kept in the back of my mind that I didn't want to disappoint him most of all. And so that was really, my anchor to make better decisions going forward.
that's a great story. I appreciate you going in depth in that. So I was a little bit familiar with that story, but that the coffee story and all that was new to me. That was fantastic. So you never know what one interaction, one conversation, one book, one program, right? This
Right.
this podcast, you just never know what somebody needs at that particular time, and that's super cool. Whether he knew, it sounds like he didn't even necessarily know what he was even doing, but for the
Right.
impact that it had on your life, and then for us to be having this conversation today because he had that conversation with you. Know what I mean? When you look back and start connecting the dots as far as all the things that you've accomplished since that moment, that's really fascinating, really, to think about where you are today based on that one man's conversation that he challenged you, right? He kind of just really, put a foot in your ear and said, hey, wake up, Jim, you
Right.
got a decision to make, right? And you stepped into it. So congratulations to you to wanting to do that, to change that for yourself as well. That's super cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So it's good to be here now for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So wow. So moving on from that first question, this second one and third is going to be a lot of fun too. So if you can, so we've heard a little bit about the upbringing and that type of thing. And so I'm curious to hear kind of where you take this second question, but what's been the biggest challenge of your life and what have you learned from that, Jim?
Well, my adolescence and shortly, after Mr. Ballard really was my biggest challenge as I look back. And, sitting here 66 years old now, I've covered a little bit of ground. And yeah, there have been some challenges, but nothing as significant, as that time frame was. It was, starting in the time frame of 1968. We had racial riots going on in town. Wichita was much like Birmingham, Alabama, or some other cities where, I mean, it was really dangerous to be outside. We had curfews and so on, but, we didn't pay any attention to that kind of stuff. And interestingly, most of my friends at the time were Black. So I spent a lot of time in what we call the ghetto, we now call the hood. Um, and, there were many, many times where I was in situations that were literally, life or death, could have been catastrophic. But what I observed, and I think part of it's just, the personality and nature that God blessed me with, was that even within an instant, if I could figure out what it was that somebody really wanted, that I could negotiate and, save myself. And a lot of times in those situations, people are just triggered, whether it be from fear or they want to overpower or whatever the case. And sadly, many of those times, those individuals didn't survive.
Mm,
And so, seeing that people, even in the most chaotic circumstances, are still human beings, and if you can figure out how to relate to them, in the moment, then you can make a lot of progress. So I saw that, and I saw it consistently, and it was those challenges where, even within that, there were times where I lost hope. I really, couldn't see a way out. I was in this life, and there just didn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel. It was just going to be the same thing day after day. I was fortunate in that I had a grandfather and an uncle who were great mentors, but they had no idea what was going on, most of the time in my life. But they did teach me a lot that helped me in life later on. But for the most part, it was pretty dark, and honestly, there were times where I thought of taking my own life.
mm,
And again, for whatever reason, God, didn't allow that to happen. Um, but not to repeat, but I did make it through that time frame of almost 7 years, and was able to turn things around. But definitely the most challenging, not having my father after the time I was 10 years old. Back then you got the mandatory 2-week visit in summer, and that was about it. So, even up until the time of his death, when you don't have the opportunity to create that relationship when you're young, it's really, really difficult for it to happen, later in life. So, even though my dad and I became close, it was more of like a friendship as opposed to a father-son relationship. So, I feel like that was a challenge in of itself, that I just never really got the opportunity that I had hoped for as a son.
yeah, for sure. Wow, that's super challenging as well. So I appreciate you sharing that too. Uh, yeah, fantastic. You're blowing me away with everything that you're sharing. This is super valuable, right? So it's the lessons, it's taking the hardship and turning it into a positive, which I know you've done throughout your life, whether it was your corporate career or into your business that you developed and out to the foundation that you're part of. But so, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that as well. So kind of talking about kind of on that same thread, as far as you've mentioned about all the challenges that you had in that high school-ish time frame, right around senior year, getting into college. So one thing I always love to ask is, if you could look backwards, right, from what you know now, if there was just a nugget of wisdom, and you've already shared a ton of them with us already today. So I'm gonna try to pull one more out of you, Jim. Eh, What do you wish you would have known back then that you've obviously, fast forward to where you are today? Is there anything that you just really wish you would have known then that could have even have changed things even maybe a little bit more faster than what has transpired? Anything like that at all for you?
Well, sure. As I've hit this button 2 or 3 times already. I wish that I had known God, um, and to give a little bit of credit, my both of my grandmothers were what I call church ladies. I mean, they
Mm,
were active in their churches. My grandfathers didn't really attend. My parents went some when they were together, but I really didn't know what any of that meant. And so, yeah, I wish that I had known God and been close to Him. I think it, would have changed the trajectory, but I don't know that I would have learned the lessons that I learned going through the fire. So I'm grateful for the way that things have turned out. But yeah, that was probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's great. So fast forward a little bit into your, I know you didn't necessarily finish college. I raised my hand on that too, right? I went, but I didn't necessarily make it all the way. But hey, we can all make it out there in the real world as well. So
Right.
you were engaged with, obviously in the corporate world, right? Training, coaching, some of the, and I didn't realize this. You brought this to my attention. Some of the big name corporations are founded or were formed in Wichita, Kansas. And you can probably rattle off those names better than I can. So I'll let you do that if you'd like. But at the same time, so you kind of got engaged with a mentor that started to open up doors and to introduce you to multiple different things in the corporate world, which led you into coaching and training and that type of thing. So I would love for you to kind of talk about that transition, going from this moment where this gentleman basically gave you an ultimatum. It's either you need to shape up or we're going to have to figure out what's going on. And then obviously you've blossomed in the corporate world. So can you kind of talk about that transition a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So in starting college, because of the whole reading issue, I decided to go into engineering. I thought maybe I wouldn't have to read quite so much as if I went into something else. My best friend actually went into political science, and I said, no way. So, but anyway, got into engineering. Well, of course, no matter what your focus is going to be when you're first starting out, you've got to take the basics, but you also have to have some electives. And so I took this elective called entrepreneurship. And so the professor of that class, a guy named Ron Christie, was really kind of the next mentor. And so a few weeks after class had started, he shared with me that he had been named the associate director of what they had just put together with the dean of business school called the Center of Entrepreneurship. And it was actually the first one on a university campus in the U.S. And um, it's like, what does that mean? And he said, well, we're going to bring people together. We've got a lot of resources here in Wichita, and just to cover those bases a little bit. So that, yes, that's where Pizza Hut was founded in 1957. Little tiny old flower shop liquor store that two brothers were gifted to try this thing called pizza. That Coleman Outdoor Products, Beech Aircraft, Cessna Aircraft, Learjet, just because those founders happened to live there in town. And Rent-A-Center is another one. So a guy named Tom Devlin, who founded Rent-A-Center, I used to play basketball with him at the YMCA every day at lunch, and so he was another mentor as well. But yeah, so all of those things going on, and what my professor Ron and the dean named Fran Jabara decided to do was to bring these people together. They had consulted with a number of them in their own businesses for various business challenges, but now for them to give back. So for people who had, fledgling businesses or business ideas, they could come to the center and get coaching and counseling, from these titans who, had obviously made it big. And so I asked him, so what am I supposed to do? And excuse me. He said, well, just come and, we'll kind of figure it out. And I had enough engineering and a little bit of computer science, at least that's what we called it back in the day, with things like assembly language and Fortran and COBOL, things nobody hears about these days. But anyway, so I came in and, just observed for a little while and saw that they were doing these pro formas for these people to help them, do financial forecasting and probability and that type of thing. But they were using TI calculators and ledger pads and pencils to do this, and it would take them forever. And so I told Dr. Jabbar, I said, there are these things called computers. We have them here on campus, but I said also, there are these new little computers that Radio Shack makes one, and there's this brand new company called Apple, and they make them as well, and they can do this kind of stuff for you. And so anyway, I'll try and shorten it up a little bit, but I went with him to buy two Apple computers and the software to go with it. So spreadsheet, word processing, a little database application. And so as soon as he bought them, I said, well, why do you need two? And he said, well, I'm going to take one home, and you're now hired to come over and help my son Harvey and me learn how to use this every Saturday morning. And it's like, oh my gosh. So anyway, that's how it happened. And then um, Dan Carney and his brother Frank founded Pizza Hut, and Frank saw, kind of some of the things that I had done there. And in the meantime, I was working part time for McKesson Pharmaceuticals, and had worked through basically their entire operation, starting out, interestingly enough, legally delivering pharmaceuticals to the pharmacies and hospitals around town. Hauling pure cocaine that friends found out. It's like, come on, man. And it's like, no, can't go back to that stuff. Anyway, worked my way up through and ended up in their data processing department, and so I'd learned some kind of remote technology there. And so Frank Carney's like, we have 4,000 stores around the world. This was 1978, and everything is completely manual. We have nothing automated. We have to automate. So I want you to come join this small team that we're putting together and see what we can do. And so there literally was no such thing as POS at the time. We were taking, cash registers that you'd find at Sears or, JCPenney's or places like that, working with IBM and NCR, and trying to develop some hardware as well as some software that would be viable in a restaurant. And so that was kind of where it all started. But that's another example of where a door opened into the corporate world, and gave me the opportunity to join that team and work with those guys. And that's where I started traveling in Southeast United States. There were four of us, and we each had a quadrant. And so we would, work with the various vendors in our particular area, but we would also go out to regional offices and even stores and test different prototypes and that type of thing. And so I was traveling so much that my Fortran professor came to me one day and he said, you're going to fail this class, but I know you can, write every piece of code that we would ever want you to, blindfolded. So you're never going to get a chance in business like you have right now. My suggestion is that you quit school. You can always come back sometime, but take advantage of this opportunity that you have. And so I did, just so I didn't flunk out. And so continued on with Pizza Hut, and developed the baseline essentially for point of sale for them. Well, then my entrepreneur professor comes back. He owned some furniture stores that were based out of Boulder, Colorado, where they manufactured furniture and had retail stores in Colorado, Kansas, and Texas. And he says, whatever Frank's paying you, I'll pay you more. I want you to be the general manager of my furniture company and automate it. And so that was another door that had already been opened, but certainly not in that capacity. And so went to work for Ron for a couple of years, and actually came down here to Dallas for Furniture Market, and met a guy by the name of Joe Glover, who had been Ross Perot's personal assistant at EDS. He was graduated at the top of his class from the Naval Academy, and was a Marine, was part of the Iranian hostage extraction back in the day, and just a really well-versed guy, and probably learned more about business from him than just about anybody. But they were starting a new technology startup company that was really kind of a precursor to the internet. And this was 1982. And so he convinced me to move to Dallas and go to work for them. And So again, it was just another door that opened purely on relationship. And so, I could go on, but it's just been that has been the most valuable lesson in my entire life that I share with my clients, that I share with everyone, is at the end of the day, it's all about human relationships, not just superficial meeting with people and that kind of thing. It's really, asking the questions. As a coach, it's all about asking the questions. It's not telling people what to do, but being able to extract and understand what their challenges are, what their pain points are, and continuing to drill deeper and identify then not the problem, but the solutions to be able to get them to where it is that they truly want to be. And, they find that, hey, this guy's really interested in helping me, and, even going back to Frank Carney, he shared so much with me because I was just like a sponge. I was trying to, learn everything I could from him, but at the same time support his mission. And, so, I think unfortunately, especially, the last few years in our society here, COVID was not a help in that case, but we've become too superficial. We don't engage people as human beings and really dive into what they're all about and what their needs are, and how we can best serve them. I feel like that our purpose for each of us, that God has placed us here on this earth to be of service. That's the number one thing. We just have to figure out what it is that we can do to provide that and how best to serve it up to different people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So all of that experience, we've talked about the journey of being a youngster, right? All the challenges that came with that, which led to the opportunities through relationships, through this journey of in this corporate world of, I mean, pre-internet, right? I mean, I'm in my late 40s. I'm almost 50, so I remember pre-internet. Some of our listeners may not even know what that even means or what life was like prior to a phone or even this computer that you and I are talking on today. I mean, imagine what. Yeah, it's interesting to think back life back then, and to think that you had a hand in a lot of those businesses, well-known brands that we know today at the beginning part of basically creating, like you said, the point of sale systems, right? That's what POS stands for. That's super cool. Yeah. So which led you then to, I know you kind of went down the corporate journey. You're doing the corporate thing, helping folks, creating these POS systems, and it sounds like you might have gotten a little bit burned out. I'll let you kind of answer that as far as the travel and the wear and tear on the family and even yourself, I'm sure, which led you then to create and start out on your own as far as your Warrior Performance Collective, your training program, where you help high level athletes, top level C level folks really get clear on performance. One word that came to mind, everything that I've read, everything that I've listened to with you was preparation. Preparation was a big word that I kept seeing over and over and over as I was preparing for this call today, no pun intended. So, can you talk a little bit about your transition then from the corporate world now into your coaching with your clients? Kind of what you see as far as like, what are some nuggets of wisdom that you might be able to share with folks as you've seen people that are performing at a very high level, but then taking it to the next step or the next level? Is there anything that some common things that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that really came about, I'd mentioned that I'd commuted to Boston for 10 years, and that was with Fidelity Investments. And then was recruited away by Levi Strauss. So that was the San Francisco gig, and that was a global role. So I had employees all over the world. Our Asian headquarters was Singapore, European headquarters was Brussels, Belgium, and something's going on somewhere 24 hours a day. So after 23 years, the combined organizations of all of that, it's like, man, there's just got to be more to life. But the one thing that I enjoyed really the most was truly, building my people. And one of the things that I had put together was that they each had, all of my direct reports had to do a annual plan, and that plan was purely focused on personal development. I don't care what you're learning in skills. You've got enough skills to get to where you are. But what are you doing to develop yourself? What are you doing to prepare yourself for the future? Tomorrow is not a given, whether that's life itself or whether that's, the next step in your career or whatever. So how are you preparing for that? And most of them have never thought about it. It's just we get in the hamster wheel and it's one day after another. They're all the same and so on. And it's like, why we don't have to live that way. We don't have to have that mindset, which is really mediocre in my opinion. So you have the capability to be better. Everyone does. And it's just a matter of, first of all, being mindful about it, and then being intentional about what you're going to do about it. So finally, the last couple of years I was at Levi, I was like, um, I've got to wind this down somehow or another. And actually, my director of finance had left just before I did, and his son was a physician in LA. And he realized that people go to med school to become good doctors, not to learn how to manage a practice or the business aspects of being a doctor. So he decided to be a financial coach for doctors. And he called me one day and he said, you have to think about being a coach because, you really have helped all of the people that you've had, working with you over the years, and they've all benefited from it. And it's like, I don't know. And so a few months later, a guy named John Maxwell, who a lot of people probably are familiar with, actually gave the message in my church here in the Dallas area, and had the opportunity to meet John and talk with him for a minute. And he was just starting at that time what he called the John Maxwell team, that has gone on and now has tens of thousands of people that have become certified under that program. But I was really fortunate um, in that, okay, this is the second time this coaching thing's come around. It's in God's house, so maybe I ought to listen. And so I took John up on his offer and was actually in the first group that went through that whole program. And quickly realized, I don't want to be John Maxwell. I'm not John Maxwell. He's got great material, and I, use a lot of it, but I've got to find my own lane. And during the prior years to my leaving corporate, my daughter had become ultimately a internationally ranked golfer, and so looking at all that she went through, because she didn't necessarily have the natural talents that you might think. She was one who had to drive and work hard and practice and prepare. But the fact that she had a full swing coach, a guy named Hank Haney, who was Tiger Woods' coach for a while. She had a short game coach named Dave Pell. She had a nutritionist. She had a fitness professional. She had a sports psychologist. And so, I saw the integration of all of those resources and how they really built her to become the athlete that she did become. Um, Made sense. And it's like, there are a lot of people who could really use this type of thing if they were aware of it and if they knew where it was available. So that's how I really kind of ultimately, went into the lane of the performance coaching. And the fact that it all really starts with the physical. Um, and that I learned even going back, to my adolescence. One of the things, and it's another story for another time, but I fell in love with motocross,
Mm.
and I, didn't have the means, to do that other than theft. And so through that, bought motorcycles and raced motocross ultimately for about 10 years through all of that, and even into college a little bit. But it's a very strenuous sport, and I quickly realized you have to be in shape, you have to prepare. And so that's really since I was 15 years old where I learned and appreciated the physical fitness, not just being healthy but being physically fit was very important. And I break that down into four elements and more detail for another time, but it really starts with sleep. And getting the right amount of sleep, getting effective sleep, so that your body and your mind are rested. And then followed by that is hydration. And most of us here in the US are dehydrated and we don't even realize it. And then nutrition, and then movement. And if we don't have those four things really in succession, the sleep is the foundation, then we are not able to perform at our optimum level, either physically or mentally. It impacts us cognitively. So if we think we're going to go out and set the world on fire with whatever it is that we may want to do in our career, it may happen, but it's not going to happen to the level that it could if you put those processes into place and put that preparation into place. But so working with my clients, we focus on the physical, then we get into the mental. And the foundation for the mental is the physical, and then we get into emotional, and then what I've really brought out recently is social. And social, like I said a few minutes ago, is so critically important for us as human beings. And it all then kind of comes full circle and builds upon itself. But, those are the aspects that I work with both my executive and athlete clients on. And you would think, athletes, well, they're going to be fit, they're in shape. Well, they are for their particular sport, but they're not necessarily well-rounded, and should, or whenever they end their sport, then what are they good for? So, helping them have that appreciation for, being a little more well-rounded, like I say, but it also actually enhances what it is that they, are currently doing, and having a better overall perspective, on that.
That's the question I was going to ask you, is that you've got these high level athletes, like, so I'm thinking of basketball, baseball, football, it doesn't really matter what sport, probably, right? But maybe they've lived up to that point solely on their athletic ability. Maybe that's their size, their gifts, their physical gifts. Can you think of, is there an example, like, or maybe one thing that like really hits home to them to make them realize that the sleep, the nutrition, the hydration, all of the other things, maybe what they don't consider maybe the most important part, but in actuality, it is the most important part, right? It's the foundation to be able to build upon those physical abilities to then take themselves to the next level. Can you think of an example of someone that, yeah, they had all the physical gifts in the whole wide world, but when they applied some of these little, maybe what they might have thought of as a little bit lesser important things, right? And then to be able to even take it, their performance, like you said, it will enhance not only how they feel, but how they perform. Can you think of anything specific that you've been able to help someone with?
Yeah, and I always work with people on 3 of 3, as I call it. So we're going to work on 3 elements of improvement, and then within each of those 3, there are 3 kind of micro elements that we'll focus on. So had a client that was an NFL wide receiver, and he, was pretty much at the top of his game, but still, wanted to be able to perform, even a little bit better. So started working with him on, this was both physical and mental. So have you ever thought about looking at the defensive backs that you are trying to outmaneuver as actually trying to mentor them to become better defensive backs? And he's like, what are you even talking about? And but then he started to get it, because if he felt like that he was trying to teach them a lesson in the way that he moves, the routes that he runs, even the little micro movements that may throw somebody off, then he became better. And they might become better too, which, is good as well. So it was those physical aspects, but it was then the mental preparation of having that different mindset that I'm going to go out and, show this person a lesson, mentor them, so to speak, and enabled him to enhance his game even further.
That's cool. Yeah, I had a feeling that you probably had a story there that would people at that level. I mean, those of us that aspire to be athletes, right, at the
Right.
highest level, and maybe can't comprehend the physical giftedness that it takes to perform at that level, but it all still comes down to the preparation, right? The mental mindfulness, all the different things that you're talking about, the sleep, the hydration, which is super cool. So bringing it all around full circle, I know right now, one big thing that you're super passionate about is the adaptive training foundation. So you've taken all of the skills, all of the, so there again, connecting the dots, looking backwards, right? It's super cool to know that you've taken all of these experiences, the ups, the downs, the trainings, the coachings, and now you're really focused, right, on giving back to a community of folks that physically might not be as capable of others that might not be with different limbs issues, that type of thing. I'll let you describe a little bit more in depth about what that's about, but I know you're super passionate about. Before we hit record today, you talked about a walk coming up, right? So this recording is just before Memorial Weekend of 2023, and you were talking about a charity walk that's coming up here in the next week. But take a few minutes, talk about the Adaptive Training Foundation that you're a board chairman of, what you guys do there, how it's impacted lives, and just all the greatness that you guys are doing there. Can you talk us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's what I call my passion project. But again, it started with a God connection. A friend of mine by the name of Chad Hennings, who some may recognize, played for the Dallas Cowboys back in the day with Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and so on. Introduced me to a young man who's young enough to be my son. He's 37 years old, and he played in the NFL. Incredible story himself, playing football through the NFL, but played for 5 years. Ended up having his shoulder blown out. Got hooked on opiates in the recovery process. Had a TBI, traumatic brain injury. So once they reach 5 years in the NFL, then they get their full pension. And so he had gotten married in the meantime, and it's like, okay, I've done enough. I'm out. I want to have a family and have a reasonable life. So he and his wife moved here to the Dallas area. Her parents had moved here previously, and they decided this would be a good place to raise a family. So he started a gym in Dallas, training prospective prospective NFL players that were in college for the NFL Combine and that type of thing. And so this friend that I told you about before we went live, the Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, invited him to an event where he had some other veteran friends that were going to be there. And so David Vibora is the guy's name who started the Adaptive Training Foundation that I was just talking about. He was a linebacker, and so he's like 6'4" and 260, somewhere in that neighborhood, in his playing days, and a personality even bigger than that. And so he sees this guy across the room that doesn't have any arms or legs, and he goes running over to him and says, "When's the last time you thought about getting in shape?" And the guy looks at him and says, "I don't have any arms or legs. How would you go about doing that?" And David says, "Come to my gym and we'll figure it out." And Sergeant Travis Mills looks at him and says, "Have you ever worked with anybody like me?" And David said, "No, but we'll figure it out." So Travis showed up, and they started working together from a physical standpoint. And Travis's big fear was falling. because if he fell over, he couldn't get up. He said, I'm not like a weeble. I don't bounce right back up, you know. So they started working on core strength and that kind of thing. And I'll make it a little bit shorter, but you know, once someone starts to see what they can do physically that they thought was not possible, either in their own head or had been told that by traditional medicine, that's what they believe. And when they see and prove to themselves that they actually can do some of these things, then it changes their mindset. And fast forward a bit, coming up in September, the organization will be 9 years old. And I met David in 2016. So I've been with the organization a good while. And when Chad had introduced David and I, David said, just, you know, come to the facility on a Friday and check it out. And it actually happened to be at this Navy SEALs place where he trains special forces, where he had given David a little bit of space to start working with these guys. And so I showed up, and I'm telling you, it is the most inspirational experience that you might have in a long time. And it's addictive because you truly do see people and it's not just veterans, but it's also now civilians, people that you know have had strokes or are living with Parkinson's or MS or these types of things. And you know, we can show them what they truly can do to live a more enjoyable, productive life. And then, you know, again, that changes their mindset, which changes their family dynamic, and it changes their you know, their ability and desire to serve in their community. And the one thing before I forget that I want to put out there is that, you know, we see people who are different than we are, and in this case it's, you know, physically, and we tend to avoid connection with them because we don't know what to say. You know, we don't want to feel awkward. We don't want to embarrass them or ourselves. And of the hundreds of people that I have literally come into contact with out in the general public, outside of our organization over the last few years, I simply walk up and ask them what happened. And without exception, every one of them is more than happy to talk about what happened because people don't engage them, and they're human, and they want to have that connection. They want to, you know, feel like people care about them. So just asking that basic question, and they open up and start sharing things. And so we at the gym now, the first Friday of every month, we have what we call the sweatiest hour, where we set up 10 to 12 workstations, and we invite the public to come in, usually 100, 120 people. And we divide up into teams of 6, and each team from the public has to have one adaptive athlete on their team. And so they do battle ropes together, they do tire flips together, they climb an inflatable ramp and slide down that we have. But the story that kind of hits home, we have a Marine who was a former Kansas City police officer, and he got hit on his motorcycle by a drunk driver, and nobody found him for 10 hours, and he virtually bled out, lost his leg, went blind because of the blood loss. And so he was participating in the sweatiest hour, and we have this 6-foot wooden wall that as a team you climb over and you roll underneath, and you do that as many times as you can in 2 minutes. And so Nate is his name, and he had his elbows up on top of that wall, and his prosthetic leg falls off. Well, his, you know, team members from the outside are like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And I said, well, help the man put his leg back on. We can do that. And I said, well, wouldn't you want somebody to help you? And so, you know, it's just an example of where, you know, we can do away with the stigma and realize that everybody is human and everybody can help. And as I said earlier, we are here to serve. So, you know, it's a way to be able to do that. But as far as the organization goes, we do 3 9-week classes each year. We do 3 10-day hyper classes, as we call it, that primarily focus on para athletes. But everyone becomes more athletic going through the program. We teach them mindfulness and meditation. And when we first opened that up about 4 or 5 years ago, we had some veterans, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and they're like, not doing that California woo-woo stuff. And so they did it anyway. And but by the time of their graduation, which we actually have a graduation ceremony at the end of the 9 weeks for each class, without exception, they said it was the most powerful thing that they had ever learned to do. So we get into breathing and, actual mindfulness and meditation. The first 15 minutes of each class session and the last 15 minutes, you amp up to get ready and go out and work hard. And then you come back and dial everything back down. But we get into nutrition and all the kind of holistic aspects. And so their lives truly are transformed. And once they're a member of the organization, they're a member for life. And not one of them from day one has ever paid a penny to go through class. It's all privately funded. So it's just, as you can tell, I am passionate about it.
I know you are, and I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate you going there as far as it's the people that attend. It's funded from the outside public, right? So it's donations, people from all over the country. I think that I've heard you say that some people from all over the world, right, are also part of it as well.
Sure.
So I know that there are inspiring videos, different places to go find out about this foundation, that type of thing. Is there any details like that, places where we can send folks to learn more about the foundation?
Yes, the website is adaptivetrainingfoundation.org, and there you'll be able to see, some of the previous classes, the class members that participated, and so on. We really look at the organization as a laboratory. We continue to learn and develop. We've got a very small paid staff of about 6 people. We have, many volunteers, from chiropractors to yoga instructors to personal trainers and so on, that volunteer their time. They learn our program so that they know how to work with people with different challenges. And we don't call them disabled, we call them differently abled. And you'll find in our parking lot out in front that all of the handicap spaces are empty because our athletes don't look at themselves as being handicapped. But say that for somebody else who really needs it.
Wow. That's super cool. That's inspiring for sure. That's awesome. That's super good. Super cool, Jim.
Check out the website, and we have been fortunate that we've had some major organizations that have gotten involved and supported us over the years, from Toyota to American Airlines, Boeing military aircraft, Starbucks, and a few others. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the individuals that see what it is that we do and the difference that we make, and want to be a part of it.
Building up people, building up families, communities, right? One ripple at a time. That's kind of what the vision that I'm kind of seeing in my mind, which is super cool. Which kind of reflects.
And I actually almost left out what I consider to really kind of be the most important part. So you've got the physical, you've got the mental, but then it's community. And so for the veterans, they knew what community was like when they were in service. They had their brothers and sisters around them, and they had each other's back. They knew what that, human connection was, to, be ready to give your life for, the person standing to your left and to your right. But that's gone once they get back, and especially if they're physically challenged. And unfortunately, so many of us, as I kind of alluded to early in our discussion, don't socially engage at that level to look at one another as brothers and sisters. So it provides civilians that opportunity as well. And so it's that community that has continued to build over the years, where, again, I said that, once you go through class, you're a member for life. And I always tell people once you walk through our front doors that you're part of the tribe for life. So it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. And so the community has just been extremely powerful and valuable.
That's super exciting. Well, so folks, I encourage you, go out there, look up the adaptive training foundation.org, get involved, check out the videos, check out the different material that they have to offer as far as the different offerings that they're helping folks overcome all these challenges, right? In their families and their communities. But it's just super cool. It's super inspiring. If folks are out there right now saying, okay, Jim Gardner, that's a guy I need to get around, which I'm super fortunate to have had the opportunity to get to know you a little bit more over the last couple of years. And then over the last few minutes here, right? I'm learning more about you all the time. But if folks are looking to connect with Jim to get into that tribe that you're talking about, what are the best ways to find you, Jim?
So my website is warriorperformancecollective.com. And my email is jim@jimgardnerlive.com.
So folks, get connected with Jim. As I mentioned, I've had the fortunate opportunity over the last couple of years that getting to know him, learning more about the past he's been on, the challenges he's overcome, the successes that he's had, the ability to help folks in challenging situations to overcome some obstacles, to see themselves in a better light is super inspiring. So I definitely encourage you, get connected with Jim, find the Adaptive Training Foundation, and go out and check out his Warrior Performance Collective and see if you can't figure out different ways to bring your performance up to a higher level. So Jim, I really appreciate your time today. This has been a fantastic conversation. Hopefully one of these days you'll be willing to come back on and tell us a little bit more, maybe even about more of those pre-internet days. Those are the kind of stories that I want to hear more about, right? That's the life before the internet. I mean, it might disconnect some of the folks listening, but hey, it would be fun for me to kind of hear about those kinds of stories as well. So hopefully you'll be willing to jump back on here with us some other time and we'll continue the discussion.
Absolutely, would love to. And thank you. I'm honored and really appreciate the time today, Randy. It's been fun.
Definitely. Well, folks, as I mentioned, go out there, get connected with Jim, and I look forward to connecting with you all again very soon. Until the next episode, bye now. Thank you for joining me on the Rich Mind Podcast. I hope you found a ton of value in this episode. If so, I'd really appreciate a 5-star review, and you can also share it with your family and friends. And as my mentor Jim Roden shared with me, in order to have more, you must first become more. And in order to become more, you must work harder on yourself than you do on your job. So go out there today and work harder on yourself to become more and build the life of your dreams. Until next time, my friends.